what then? So that's what I kind of tried to answer. Okay. And all the words I'm going to say pretty much will be up on the PowerPoint when it arrives. So you can read, or you can listen, or you can, or think about something else, obviously. Is it going to come up?
Yes, yes.
It will, just be a second. Okay.
It's too old already. And I do tend to gabble, so just if you want to pause between slides, I think there's only 5 slides, maybe 6. And if you want to tell me to slow down, tell me to slow down, because that, please. It's taking long now. I thought there were other things I needed to say, but I'll leave it. And now I need to press. Oh, what do I need to press? Bottom left.
Bottom left. The smiley faces?
No.
Sorry. Okay. So this title is really the title of a slightly larger paper, but I'll leave it up there because in a way, one of the things in relation to this question of if we're being reflexive and putting knowledge into doubt, oh, I'm on the wrong page. How will I look back?
Just press the button up there.
Yes. Sorry, a little if we constantly put ourselves into the research, which I would say I was very embarrassed because I've heard Anne refer this morning to ending up writing about yourself, which is what I often do. And there is this question, if you're trying to work out how you're putting yourself into the research, you end up looking at that, what is the research about? So the question kind of which subject, whose desire, is kind of a constant question with me. What am I researching? Is there a subject? That kind of relationship. And so this question, that's a sort of general big question about what is the research about, whose desire, which subject. And then I'm particularly looking at the notion of the action of interpretation, what it means, what that might mean, which I'll go on to talk about, and what it might mean to articulate desire in the process of research, which is I suppose a sort of psychoanalytic way of looking at what research might be about. And now I'm kind of reading out. I recently did an introductory session on psychosocial methodologies on an introductory course for first-year doctoral students. And I talked about the power of the non-literal and the importance of metaphorical relations between instances of data. And I illustrated this, talking about myself, with an anecdote from my own psychotherapy, which was about squirrels and peeing. And then I shared, which I can share with you if necessary later, and I also shared some of my data from my project with the students, and I shared my detailed, and yet obviously very provisional analysis, which of course it always has to be provisional because we're reflexively undermining the notion of certain knowledge. And then one of the students, possibly predictably, asked, but isn't this all just your own subjective interpretation? And my response in the class was, also, it was honestly slight irritation. Oh no, not again. But I said, well, what do you think? Did you find my account plausible? Did it resonate with you in any way? But what I want to do here in the next few minutes is to try to formulate an alternative possible response to this student's question. Okay, so that one way of looking at this is, for me, is to ask the question, how might Lacan's distinction between interpretation and the action of interpretation help us to reformulate conceptions of truth within research? For Lacan, the analyst's interpretation constitutes an imposition of pre-existing psychoanalytic theories of desire. And this is in contrast for him to the action interpretation that occurs when an analyst provokes the analysand's articulation of their own desire. And this is the quotation from Lacan. He says, what's important is to teach the subject to name, to articulate, to bring this desire into existence. If desire doesn't dare to speak its name, it's because the subject hasn't yet caused this name to come forth. So it's only when the analyst is able to bring the subject to the point of naming their desire, bringing forth a new presence in the world, that what Lacan calls the action of interpretation can be conceived. And this raises the question, for me, of what might count as an action of interpretation in the process of research. How might we recognise the moment when we have provoked a new articulation of desire, rather than simply imposing pre-existing frameworks of interpretation, whether that of the researcher or the participant. So I've been thinking about what this might mean in practice, and I've gone to Jason Klinos's very good book, which is called Lacan and Science. So Jason Klinos provides some elaboration of how the action of interpretation relates to a conception of truth, and of what this might look like within psychoanalysis. He asks, what kinds of evidence qualify as legitimate indices of the effectiveness of the analyst's intervention? And he suggests, as Bernard Burgoyne puts it, he's citing someone else, the effectiveness of an intervention is judged by whether or not it facilitates the production of more material, not by whether it has other effects on the analysand, whether the analysand refuses it or agrees to it, or whether or not the analysand is pleased with it. That is, it is only effective if it overcomes to some extent the resistance. And in what guise does this new material appear? Of course, the new material can only appear within the discourse of the analysand. So I think that we're shifting the position of truth to something out there, to something new being produced, the production of material. Okay. So this point about the new material appearing in the discourse of the analysand, the singular discourse of the analysand, is crucial here. I'm citing Klinos again. He explains, the evidence against which the analyst's interventions are judged effective or not is to be found in the analysand's discourse, not in the mythical idea of the typical subject, the so-called normal subject, not in a supposed objective reality subsisting somewhere out there. He goes on, truth in psychoanalysis is linked to the experience of surprise, to the subject's confrontation with unconscious formations which escape the subject's conscious control, but which nevertheless originate in the subject's elsewhere. This is why a large part of the analyst's function is geared towards operationalising the fundamental rule of reassociation. But while the clinical method remains one, the techniques are many. The analyst must tailor his or her interventions, invent new techniques that are sensitive to the specificity of the analysand's discourse, to catch a particular ego off guard. And I think what's interesting here is that it's about the process of disrupting. We have a sort of conception of big discourse and sort of at a social level, but the specificity, looking for the very specificity of the discourse of a particular subject, requiring, in order to shift, for it to be confronted with an unconscious other of that discourse. So, I'm finishing off. My question kind of at the beginning is if you're reflexively undoing notions of secure knowledge, what then is truth? So truth here relates to the specificity of the discourse of the individual subject in the context of the clinic. It also relates to surprise, to confrontation with an unconscious formation within this discourse, and to the production of something new. And my question is, how might we bring this insight about specificity, surprise, and confrontation with unconscious formations into notions of truth within the social sciences? And correlative to this, whose discourse might be the site of truth? So when you have the confrontation between analyst and analysand, you're trying to shift. It's clear which subject's discourse you're trying to shift. In the process of research, you've got the researcher, you've got the participant, you've got the readers, you've got the various other aspects of the social context. So whose discourse might be the site of truth within research? The discourse of the researcher, the discourse of the research participant, the discourse of our readers and students. And in what way might desire, the excess beyond language, be articulated in the process of research? That's kind of my questions, which I'm asking myself, and I have some instances that I'm kind of working with at the moment from my own research to try to explore whether I can identify something as an action of interpretation. But maybe to try and concretize a little bit, I thought as I was listening to Anne this morning, and she gave us that account of Vanessa Phelps, who is the person who is the presenter of the radio programme, who was kind of pathologizing the the experience of someone, of a serial migrant. And so in a way what you would say is, what would it mean? What could shift Vanessa Feltz's discourse? What would it mean to confront Vanessa Feltz with the unconscious formations that are a part of her pathologizing discourse? And that was really, I'm ending with those questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Claudia, for this interesting talk. Quick round again of questions and answers, if you have any. Okay, then we'll go on to Durini.